Welcome, Legionnaires, to the Long Live the Legion podcast, where we talk about the Legion of Superheroes comic book team and break subjects down so that whether you're just out of the Legion Academy or you're a longtime veteran with your own flight ring, you get to know the team a little bit better. I'm your co-host, Jim.
And I'm your co-host, Jay.
And welcome to episode 24. What do we have on that mission monitor board today, Jay?
We have a really exciting topic on the mission monitor board, but before I get to that, we actually have a special guest today. We have someone who I will jokingly refer to as the RJ Brand of our podcast. We are joined by the host of both Men of Steel and Another Pass, Case Aiken.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me back on the show. I am so glad to be continuing my brand of talking about this story on podcast.
And the story we're going to talk about is the death of Superboy. So just a rough guess, how many times do you think you've talked about this in the past, Case?
So for the purpose of podcasting, twice. So this will be my third time, which will officially make it just like one of my things. But I talked about it on Men of Steel, and then I talked about it on Anthony Desiato's Digging for Kryptonite podcast. So it's been part of my oeuvre.
So it's a hat trick is what
Yes.
we're saying here. You got the hat trick out now. So what we're going to be focusing on for today's discussion is Legion of Superheroes V3 number 37, Superman number 8 from the Byrne era, Action Comics number 591, and Legion of Superheroes V3 number 38. Although there's some stuff we'll probably talk about just prior and just after that. That will be part of the discussion, just because the story is so impactful that it has reverberations kind of throughout the DC universe, not just the Legion.
Yeah, really interesting and weird ones. The thing I love so much about this story is that it's so condescending towards Silver Age material, while at the same time being incredibly Silver Agey in terms of the concepts that they're throwing out there. Like the idea of a pocket universe and all that is just wonderful fodder for the kinds of things Superman used to just have in his world. And yeah, I love talking about it, love thinking about it, love it, trying to explain the Matrix entity Supergirl that comes out of this.
Which is something that I very recently learned just from listening to the Anthony's podcast, actually, is where I learned of that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how come I never knew it? And it's 2025. And I've read these books. And I still didn't realize that. So there you go.
Don't feel bad. It was only about a year or two ago that I realized that the 4 Legionnaires that Superman fought in the Action Comics were the doppelgangers of the Fantastic Four. I never put that together.
Oh yeah, because there's that really great Fantastic Four issue that Byrne did. Yep. And I'm going to be negative about John Byrne quite a bit on this podcast, but I do really love his Fantastic Four run.
Yeah, and that's worse. I have that Fantastic Four run. I've read it multiple times, and I never made that connection. And then I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm like, yes, I'm an idiot. So if we've learned nothing else from all of my podcasts, I'm an idiot, and we'll just move forward with that.
Well, it's all about learning. That's what this whole thing. Exactly. I'm really excited to have this conversation because my background with this story is that I was obsessed with collecting back issues as a kid. There was a bookstore that was local to me that had like a 50-cent bin for all kinds of random issues. And so I devoured any chance I got to pick up like a Byrne issue of Superman. It's also how I got into Legion of Superheroes material, but I didn't come across the Legion issues. I came across the Superman and Action Comics issue. So for a long time, I had read that story, and then they finally reprinted like a bunch of the Byrne stuff, and it included the Legion issues. So I was like, oh, that's the whole story. Cool. But then today I'm going to get a chance to like find out a little bit more about the additional sandwich of material that I started with like 2 slices of meat and then 2 slices of cheese, and now I'm going to get the bread.
I was the exact opposite. Like I got into these stories when they were coming out. So I was reading the Superman issues and the Legion issues as they were being released, as they were going. Yeah, like just being in that moment. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to those stories.
Yeah, and for me, to kind of round the horn around how we came to see this story, as everybody knows, old hat at this point, I came to the Legion right after Zero Hour. And after that case, it was like you, where I just started picking back issues of the Legion wherever I could. And so not a lot that I got made sense. So it wasn't until 2021 or 2020, somewhere in that pandemic timeframe, when I decided to do as complete of a reread of the Legion that I could, was when I actually read this particular storyline beginning to end. So that kind of explains the whole why I didn't understand about the Matrix Supergirl and what this pocket universe had to do and things like that. So let's get this started, and let's set the stage first, because this story really gets teed off from the end of the Cosmic Boy miniseries. So at the very end of the Cosmic Boy miniseries, Cosmic Boy and Night Girl face off against the Time Trapper. And at the very, very end, right after they get zapped back into the 30th century, you get this image of the Time Trapper being very sinister, and you see a frozen Superboy and Crypto standing behind him and he has these sinister plans. And then we're all just like, okay, what's going to happen? And then so what happens is the Time Trapper is going to be really messing with the Legion, because he says Cosmic Boy will return with all the Legionnaires at his back. Determined lad, he'll try to save history, his future, his reality. He doesn't dream that time itself is stacked against him. And then that's when you see the Superboy and Crypto, because the summary of the Cosmic Boy miniseries is that Kaz and Lyda have gone back to Earth in the 1980s, and there was no Superboy. There's only Superman, and all of their known history has changed. And so Cosmic Boy and Night Girl come back to the Legion, and they're like, guys, we got to do something. The past isn't as we know it, because as we know, we've been hit by the consequences of the Crisis of Infinite Earths, and that's where everything is kind of reset from a DC history perspective.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize this for anyone who's not fully caught up on just like what a bomb this was for the Legion of Superheroes that they dropped, like in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like as a story, like, you know, it's a perfectly fine big crossover, and it was doing its job of trying to streamline all kinds of things. But Legion was just left alone, and no thought was paid to the consequences of any of its actions going into it all. And that has been the original sin of the Legion continuity ever since, because no one has been able to figure out how to make heads or tails of this incongruous element of the Legion being so rooted in the Silver Age. And having the Silver Age concept of Superboy there, and being a spinoff of Superboy in a world where there was no Superboy. And even when they have done efforts to restore that relationship, it's already, they have already done so much damage to like the ongoing perspective of the characters that they're now like this myriad perspective of like, which version is your Legion, which version is the one that you actually want to roll with, like what characters, what roster. It's so scattershot now, and it all starts here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. I was trying to think of a parallel, like to try to compare it for anybody who doesn't know Legion history or doesn't know how chaotic this was. If you were to suddenly say, like, guess what? Captain America had never been in the Avengers. Like that never happened. And all of those stories now don't exist. And even then it's kind of hard to sort of relate this, because it is, I mean, Superboy's the influence. Superboy's the reason why the Legion started. And then suddenly, post-Crisis, when they reboot Superman, one of the first things to go away is Superboy. And they're like, okay, there was never a Superboy. And there wasn't even a moment's thought, at least from the stories that I've read and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, there wasn't a moment's thought in DC hierarchy of like, okay, how are we going to make this work? They were solely focused on saving Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and their core characters. And that was sort of the point of Crisis. And the Legion was, I mean, saying they were at the bottom of the list is actually probably too nice. They were just not even in the room for these conversations.
Some of this discussion, I think we can save towards the end of what we're going to talk about, just because there's so much that goes on over these 4 issues that so much that happens later, just from an editorial perspective, especially when we get to the 5 years later era, that I think we can get a lot of woulda, shoulda, couldas. And I think there's a lot to be said around that, because one of the things that I'd always said is that, well, you have a scenario where, Case, to your point, you have this very Silver Agey concept with Superboy, even to the effect of in the 70s when they were going back and having Superboy stories and having this happen, it was still the 1950s type of environment. If you're always going back to that 50s era, but time in the modern age keeps on advancing and stuff like that, at some point, Superman's going to be like, 80, you're coming back to the 1950s to be with Superboy. So yeah, you're right. Nobody had really thought about how does this impact the team? How does this impact Superboy, Superman? What do we do about it? And I think when they realized that and we said, hey, we need to do something about the Superboy Legion thing, that's where I think we get this story from.
Yeah. And I want to shout out, while Legion wasn't considered in terms of like, how is this all going to fit when they did Crisis on Infinite Earths, one thing we do have to point out is that Legion was selling well enough that it wasn't touched.
It was one of the top sellers.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of a victim of its own success in that regard. It's the same problem that other books like Batman or Green Lantern had, where because they were successful books at the time that they were doing the revision, they don't make a lot of changes. And it's the same thing you see with New 52 when they do a similar kind of reboot. The books that are doing really well don't get these like hard reboots. And because they're afraid to stir things up too much on the books that are doing well, but they are doing these radical redesigns on other books, it creates this imbalance in terms of how everything's supposed to fit together.
Let's dig into the story a little bit. And so one of the things when we talked about the Time Trapper last episode, we talked about the fact that there's this concept built around him called the Iron Curtain of Time. And this is something that the Legion has never been able to get to under their own power. They try to go into the future to confront him, and they're never able to make it there on their own. Something stops them. And so in this case, they build this bigger time bubble than they usually use, and this squad gets assembled, including Mon-El, Brainiac 5, Night Girl, Ultra Boy, Cosmic Boy, and Block. And am I missing anything? I think that's most of them there.
Invisible Kid, or the whole team? It's
Invisible Kid 2, right? Yeah. Is part of that. Yes. And so they move forward into the future, and then the time stream starts getting wacky. And what's happening is the Time Trapper is pushing them towards the 1950s era Smallville, where they're used to seeing their classic Superboy. And so that's where they end up, right in front of the big sign that says "Welcome to Smallville, home of Super."
Right. And fortunately, they've got two for sure people who are very familiar with Smallville, who actually spent quite a bit of time in the form of Mon-El and Ultra Boy. We're putting a pin in Mon-El, and I'm going to give a rant in a minute.
Buckle up.
But they have a good group that can go in and is familiar enough that, like Mon-El's able to like recognize the chief of police, and they bump into Pete Ross and know him, and they're able to get to the Kents fine because they've got a crew that knows the lay of the land really well. Okay, so pulling out that pin. Mon-El. Okay. So things get weirder further, but the explanation that they present in this of it being a different reality and that's how we get Superboy doesn't make any goddamn sense, because Mon-El is also present, and Mon-El got to the future the old-fashioned way. Yes, he was in the Phantom Zone, but that doesn't change the fact that he traveled through time by way of just waiting it out. He's a Superman version of Captain America in that regard, where he was frozen in the Phantom Zone, unable to interact, but able to witness everything for 1,000 years. And he went from that past in Smallville to the future, and they never explain that at all. They could have. They could have in this book, but they didn't.
Well, we'd rather not bore you with the details of our escape.
No, I mean, John Byrne definitely wants to bore you with the details of this escape. John Byrne puts so many like thought balloons or text bubbles that are just like straight exposition for this. Time Trapper easily could have been like, oh, he was in the Phantom Zone, but like I manipulated time.
Honestly, I am really surprised they didn't just add that little bit. I mean, one sentence would have done. I mean, in fact, you if you think about it, it would be kind of an interesting twist to say, yeah, Mon-El, you're originally from this Phantom Zone pocket universe, or you're from the Phantom Zone in this pocket universe that I created, not where you think you're from. I think that might have been an interesting kind of twist.
Like have Mon-El be the only person who like legitimately remembers the pre-crisis world.
Well, I'll go an even easier one. Why would he remember anything from 1,000 years ago? Like, I don't remember anything from a week ago. And like, this is one thing that's always broken my brain about Mon-El. He's like, oh yeah, 1,000 years ago, I remember clearly that this happened and this was the thing. And it's like, okay, so it's because he has a super brain because he's Daxamite? Or you could have just said like, yeah, I mistook Superman for Superboy. That's literally all you had to do. And then you could have just said like, yep. And then he gets to the future and they start telling him what they think happened. And he just goes, yeah, I buy that. Like there's so many ways you could have approached this rather than just not talk about it. But I think the not talking about it was the easiest way. And I think I have a strange feeling like Levitz didn't want to fix any more than he absolutely had to. And I think he was perfectly content to just say, let's ignore this stuff because
which is a dramatic change from Giffen and the Beer Moms and 5 years later who are like, oh, wait a minute, we got to fix this, and this, and this, and oh, let's do this one too. And,
which we'll get into, but yeah. It's just a really weird spot here in terms of how they fix things, because we also had like the death of Supergirl. They had like a tribute issue for her in this run. So like
that's a rant of mine. If you want this, we'll take the pin out of that rant too. The Legion knew Supergirl died in the Crisis 1,000 years after it happened. Brainiac 5 is watching video of her getting blasted. They know she died, and yet they didn't like, hey, there's a crisis coming on. Like, there's so many time problems. I've ranted about this so much. Anytime they pull the Legion into these big crossovers, everything breaks. Like, it just doesn't work. And then 2 issues later, the crisis problem destroys Tacron Galtos. So somehow the crisis is in modern time and also in the Legion time. And the way they sort of wave it away is the Legion can't remember anything. Oh, we don't remember this. We don't remember what's going on. And every single crossover, the DC doesn't learn this lesson, that as soon as you pull the Legion into this, everything breaks. Like, you just can't do it. Anyway, don't get me started on that. That was sorry for that rant. That was just
no, it's okay. It's one of those things where I think if you're going to leverage the Legion, it's fine, but don't make everything be so tied to a continuity perspective. Just be like, hey, it's the future. Future's always in motion. Things could change. You know what I mean? It's not something that needs to be, adhered to, or just have fun with it. If it makes sense, great, run with it. If it doesn't, timey-wimey craziness. So, it's far enough in the future that it shouldn't make that much of a difference. And that's just in my opinion, unless you want it to.
Yeah. Well, when you have the final night and the story is literally the Earth is going to be destroyed and everybody from the Legion is back in 20th century Earth, and you're like, well, obviously the Earth didn't didn't get destroyed because we're all here. But that's what I mean. Just stop. Just stop doing it. I think it's just my only message there.
Yeah,
exactly.
All right. So one thing I was going to say, you brought it up earlier, but before all of our rants about this, I thought it was a really great touch that it was Ultra Boy and Mon-El and Cosmic Boy and Night Girl, because they had all been to Smallville. They all knew, and it was kind of that real nod to the old Silver Age stories of, like when Ultra Boy shows up and messes with Superboy, or Mon-El is Bob Cobb and they think he's a long lost Kryptonian. Like, it was really nice in that. And you could tell then the other 4 were basically who Byrne wanted. Like Byrne wants Block and
Sunboy.
Kid.
I forgot to include Sunboy.
And
earlier,
Sunboy. Yeah. Right. And so you could tell it was sort of these 2 teams saying, I want these 4 guys, and then I want these 4 people. It would have been nice, I mean, if I'm going to nitpick this, to have a female Legionnaire somewhere in this bubble. But
instead of the sub, because all we have is Night Girl.
In addition to.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's just jump back into the story real quick, at least the Smallville section. So the Kents, or the Legion team, the 4 that are actually in Smallville, they go visit the Kents and get fed a great dinner from Ma Kent. And I was kind of hungry when I was reading this issue, so just at home cooking food. And then Superboy or Clark comes back and says, hey, I want to show you something in the basement. And then he freezes them all with a stasis ray. And in the meantime, Pete goes and finds the rest of the Legionnaires and warns them and says, hey, something's wrong. You got to save your friends. And then so they zip off on the time bubble, and Superboy tries to zap them as well, but is unsuccessful. And that is the end of the first issue. But at the end, we get a nice little gloating scene from the Time Trapper where everybody's falling into his plans.
Yeah, I want to shout out this issue for being a bit more loving to the Silver Age material. The relationship with Pete Ross, I think, is really nice. So you said all 4 had been to Smallville. Night Girl hadn't been, but the other 3 did, and have specific memories that they call back to, especially Mon-El. And Mon-El plays the biggest part in the emotional arc of this because of his, like, Superboy's big brother kind of dynamic. But it's a loving tribute. Even Superboy's just painted miniatures of all the Legion is brought up, and it's like, man, this is it's really impressive when you look at this team, and you have all these things that are tributes to that history with the Legion that they call back to, and I think it's done really well here. And then when we get into the Byrne stuff, it's much more condescending.
One of the things I thought was interesting, mentioning Night Girl not being there, but at least in Smallville, she had been in the 20th century as part of the Cosmic Boy mini. So it was kind of weird that she didn't understand traffic laws since she had been there in the past, but she almost gets pasted by the police car.
My defense of that is every time I've been to a country where they drive on the left, not on the right, and it takes you like 10 minutes to remember, like, I'm going to get plowed if I don't look. So I was fine with that. I was going to say the other call out for the Silver Age that I really loved, and it was a real treat. It was a real sense of, like, the old Superboy and Legion stories was when Lana shows up and basically foils his whole plan because she's like, I need help with homework. And he's just too nice to say, yeah, go away. Like, I have to do this. And it was kind of that, like, every one of those, especially those old Carrie Bates stories where he'd always start with, like, Superboy and Lana back in the past, and then he'd find some way for him to, well, basically Superboy would knock her out and then fly to the future. But it was just a nice sort of tribute to that. And that's not a surprise coming from Levitz. He's long stated his love for Silver Age Legion. So I think this was his chance to kind of write a little. Yeah, we'll say tribute. I was going to think of a better word, but I can't. So
no, I think that works. I think that works. Although it is very interesting that, in case you mentioned the figurines on the shelf, it is interesting that they are basically the modern looks of all the Legionnaires as of this particular book. So instead of it being the
like
original
versions,
classics, because you also have the newer Legionnaires like block in the lineup there. So I thought that was just kind of a nice little interesting twist, right? It's one of those things where you can reference this old stuff, but you can still mingle it with the newer aspects of it as well. So there's nothing to stop you from doing it.
So I want to throw out a thing that is before we move on to the next issue. One of the reasons why the four don't go into Smallville, the group that is the Fantastic Four analogs, they all look weird. Sunboy's the only one who actually wouldn't have an issue here. And this gets into, they bring up the concept of racism, which I find fascinating to think about with classic Smallville. I joked on Men of Steel when we covered this one, like, was Smallville a sundown town? And like, not that anyone wants to tackle that. Not that they were going to try to tackle that in this, but from the standpoint of who goes in, like, it makes sense that Brainiac 5 and Block aren't going to go in, but it also makes sense that Jacques not going to go in. Like, Sunboy's the only one who could have gone in with that group and passed without it being an issue.
Although, ironically enough, this is Block's second trip to Smallville. He went in there before. He was hanging out in the much beloved Reflecto saga that we covered earlier on an episode. So they went back with Block and Dawnstar. It is one of those, I think, like, this comic came out in 1987, and he addresses that, like, Jacques basically saying, this whole, racial tension, I don't get this. And then you remember, Smallville, probably not the most diverse place. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully not a sundown town, but
right. I mean, that's just me. That's just me making a snarky joke, but
but wouldn't be shocked. We'll just put it that way if it was revealed. Yeah. So all in all, like that, I think it's a really strong start to the story. It sets the characters, it sets the threat. You get the big semi-heel turn of Superboy, where he becomes a bad guy at the very end, or kind of a bad guy, and it's like, okay, what's going on? And then the big maniacal time trapper at the end. It's a perfect way to get you to read the next issue. I mean, ironically enough, Byrne spends a crap ton in the next issue basically just retelling the story.
Thank you.
Yeah. So why don't we move on to the next issue, because 50% of it is just the issue that we just read.
Exactly. Yeah, so let's go on to Superman number 8. So this is we're now officially in the John Byrne era of the Superman titles, and so we open with Superman and Lana just hanging out in the field.
I was going to just pause for a second. If there is a John Byrne rant that you want to get off your chest right away, Case, before we get into the story, or do you want to wait a little bit?
I mean, here's the thing about the John Byrne era of Superman. Like, I first of all came into Superman during the Triangle era. Like, it was the death of Superman that really, like, brought me into DC Comics. And so, like, that was the status quo when I first approached it. And so when I was first devouring those Byrne issues, for one thing, Byrne's art is fantastic. Anything you say about his writing aside, his art is amazing. It always has been. He draws a great looking Superman. People love talking about this first panel where Superman's picking up the tree and he's in his Clark Kent glasses but no shirt, and it's just like big hairy bear Superman. Like, Superman as daddy is a thing that is, like, fun to sort of talk about. And so, like, the art is amazing, and that was always the thing that really appealed to me about this era of the character. And Byrne has a way of over explaining everything, but it's kind of appealing if you're just trying to, like, get used to, like, the character for the first time. And from a reboot standpoint, a lot of Man of Steel, the Byrne miniseries that relaunched Superman, does a good job of compressing a lot of information in a very short amount of time because its expository is all hell. But in terms of its approach to the classic things, it's not having any fun with it. It backdoors into sort of a fun situation in this book, but it is convoluted as all... I was all Grafe, but I don't think that's how you would use Grafe in that.
Not yet. Not yet.
But Byrne is a fairly stuck-up creator who has many public feuds with other creators, whom I generally take the side of those other creators on. I think that his Superman take was perfectly fine for the moment and did the mission that they were trying to Marvelize Superman. But I think they threw out the baby with the bathwater in a lot of ways. And even if the product ultimately was appealing and got the shot in the arm in sales and all the things that people liked about it, I don't think it had the reverence that it should have for a character that had such, an established history. That's my biggest thing about it. Like later Byrne stuff, I have much stronger dislike for, but like this is still, I think, a strong era for the character. This particular set of issues does not seem to care for anything Silver Agey. It's mean-spirited in a lot of ways, and characters act in stupid ways to sort of tie off all the possibilities of having any of those Silver Age references come back. This feels like they're trying to take Superboy out back and like double tap him as a way of like making sure he just never returns.
I think you can tell if you've read enough Byrne stuff is he has his reverence for Silver Age is Marvel Silver Age. Like he loves the Kirby stuff. We talked about the Fantastic Four run. That is almost like a love letter to what Lee and Kirby did because he's constantly referencing it again. Whereas in this case, this is him going, man, there was a lot of stupid stuff going on in DC Silver Age. And as much as I agree with you that there's a lot of contempt and you can tell that he doesn't like it, that was kind of the job description for him. Like, I think he came in, and I know it's really weird to say this now in 2025, but like in 1985, most comic fans looked at DC Silver Age with a little level of contempt. Like they were like, well, how dumb is this? And how dumb is this? And how dumb is this? And look, my opinion. So I can say, there's going to be people who are going to disagree with me. I think that's what he came in with. Why would we have 7 colors of kryptonite? Like, that's just silly. And nowadays we go, no, that's one of the great parts of the character. But I sometimes think with this book, this is the new Coke of Superman. This is hey, we didn't realize we missed this until you took it away from us. And then we said, hey, no. This stuff's actually important. We want it to come back. So I think he had to go that far.
At the end of the day, and, again, this is 50 years worth of comic book history we're talking about here. I guess it says a lot that today in 2025, we basically kind of come full circle to the point where Superman was Superboy. And even though there's also these other Superboys that he is his own son, John, and there's Connor. And so there's this whole big family around it. But you can still have these other things as well. You can have all the toys, I guess, is what we're seeing today, and have fun with them. But I do agree that in the 80s, there was kind of this idea of saying, oh, that's Silver Age stuff is just, we've grown up from there as a society, as a comic book industry. We've just grown up from the Silver Age stuff. And none of that is important. So we can just kind of, wash our hands of it and move on with life with more realistic and grittier stories.
Yeah, there was a real desperation to prove that comics were for adults. And I think they skewed so far the other way that they missed out what made comics fun. And it's a huge course correction. And I agree with you, Case. They go too far. I'm not defending the choices he made, that saying like, I think that this is a better story because they did this. I'm just saying, I think the mindset at the time was very much like, this is all bad. And it was a bad choice. It was the wrong choice, but I kind of understand why they did it. Reading back on it now, I loved these at the time. Like reading back at it now, I go, yeah, they missed the mark everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, from a Superman perspective, it made an impression for, about 20 years, really, until they started to entertain the notion of Superboy again, meaning a Clark Kent Superboy. But like you mentioned earlier, Case, the damage to the Legion was crazy. So,
yeah.
But we'll get into some my opinions on that in a little bit. But so I'm going to just give the real quick summary of this Superman issue in about one sentence. So Superman and the Legion clash because they see somebody that is unfamiliar and is causing problems. They fight. They say, stop, we shouldn't be fighting each other. And then we get a recap of the Legion Silver Age all the way up until the prior issue that we just went through.
Yeah, I mean, they do seed a little bit of like a storyline that was going on where Superman was losing control of his powers, and that at least is like that is instrumental in the fight actually happening. Superman accidentally shoots them with his heat vision, and they're like, "Oh God, Superboy followed us," and they're moving so fast. Now it gets into some of the weird exposition stuff that I'm talking about with Byrne, like when he's fighting Block. Block is noting that Superman feels weaker than Superboy, but it doesn't make any sense in the context of the hits that he's taking or anything. It's just like, he seems so much less powerful. And it's very similar to like other bits of exposition that we get in this, where it's just like, that's strange. It's surprising that my cape was like ripped, or like none of these would make sense in the context of the actual story. It's just there for the sake of it.
As a new reader, yeah, you'd be kind of scratching your head. And I understand why they had basically the half issue worth of flashbacks, right? Because this is a crossover. And so if you have a crossover, you're betting that a good chunk of your readers don't know who the hell these other characters are that are crossing over. So you have to do due diligence and kind of explain who they are. To your point, Case, I think it was over-explained. I don't think I needed to understand the Silver Age history of of the Legion and all of that stuff. I mean, they literally like told the entire story of Adventure 247.
And it looks good. Like, just to be clear, it looks great. The burn art looks fantastic on it. This was my introduction to Silver Age Legion of Superheroes material. Like, prior to this, I was familiar with the reboot era of Legion, but this was like a whole like, oh, this is a great explanation of all this stuff. And you see these like snapshots of the Legion of Supervillains. You see a snapshot of the Fatal Five. Like, it's great in that regard. But yeah, it's just here's just an info dump. Meanwhile, Superman's like incredulous about this whole thing, even though he's standing right next to a giant silicon man, and it's like, I was never a Superboy, and like, seems like so insulted at the concept.
Yeah. And then, but of course, at the end, what happens, that team gets frozen as well, because Superboy has indeed followed them into this particular reality. So that's our cliffhanger into Action Comics number 591. I got to say that this particular cover is really cool. This is probably one of my favorite covers of Superman, just because it's something that I always remember when I remember this particular era. So
yeah, both the burn covers are really good. As we pointed out, the Superman issue is a callback to the burn Fantastic Four issue where Gladiator fights the Fantastic Four, and that's why the team is specifically choosing an invisible guy, a smart guy, a big rock guy, and a fire guy. But then the Action Comics issue, they then did a tribute in Superboy on 0 Hour. It's not quite as 1-to-1 of a tribute, but it's a shot of it's Silver Age Superboy fighting modern Superboy. And yeah, this panel this cover is just fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Like it just gets everything. And it's always nice when Crypto makes a cover, especially at this point in time. As much as Byrne is really critical of the Silver Age, I get the sense that he's enjoying drawing this. Like the art looks like he's bringing his A game to this, and he's having, I mean, again, I could be reading into it because I'm enjoying it, but there are certain issues with the Byrne run where you get the sense that and with a lot of his comics where he's semi-checked out, and there, like you get, I don't know if you've ever read the Alpha Flight run, it is obvious as you're reading Alpha Flight that he would rather be doing any other book. And he's said that in interviews as well, because there's the one issue where there's 4 pages of nothing and it's just dialogue. And whereas this, I got the sense like, okay, he's actually doing something he's having fun with, even though he said like this was a rush job. This was a rush storyline to come up with. They kind of had to throw this together. Now, again, you can believe Byrne's quotes if you want, and that's another story for another day. But yeah, I just get the sense it's a little bit, he's having fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Actually, one last thing before we move into the Action Comics issue. The fact that Brainiac 5 is able to recount the entirety of the previous issue is just incredibly head scratching. And it's comics, and like I get it that they had, with 2 different writers, there's no way to say how much Pete Ross actually said if you didn't read the full script. But it does seem that they read the full script, because they have like the exact scene where Pete Ross comes up, something attacked us. And if it could take down Superboy and Mon-El, that's something really big.
I was going to say, Case, I don't think they not only read the same script. I think that John Byrne must have gotten LaRock's pencil pages, his finished pages, and kind of traced them or something, because
it's really close. Yeah,
it's really, really, really close.
But not exactly the same. Mon-El's shirt is different. Mon-El has long sleeves in the Superman issue and short sleeves in the Legion issue.
Little differences. Yeah, it's just very strange. So, but still, it's kind of fascinating that they were able to do it, especially if it's this quick turnaround that you mentioned there.
Yeah, but moving into this issue where Superman, so they freeze the Legion and Superman, but Superman actually thaws.
They go back into the Pocket universe, which is where all the knockdown, drag them out happens. And so we got the big fight, but we also get this nice exposition of what the hell is actually going on from the Time Trapper here. So this real expository couple of pages on what the nature of a pocket universe is.
Getting that explanation there. I mean, we've said this before. There's just a ton of exposition in this story, and this is another example. But it needed to be there. You needed to have that moment. I kind of wish Time Trapper had said it to somebody. It would have been nicer if there had been another person in this scene. Like, he's just kind of ranting to no one. Here was my evil plan. And you're like, you couldn't have done this when the Legion was there so the Legion could react, because it just seems like he's just talking to the audience. Here's what's
I mean, he could have talked to Cosmic Boy about it, right? Because that's when he had them
yeah, in any, like the frozen Legionnaires, he could have just been talking to them like it could be a scene from Hamlet.
Or like, just imagine if it's him talking to Brainiac 5, who's the one who's going to be the most messed up because his time machine didn't actually work. They jumped to a different dimension. And he's explaining to Brainiac 5, like, you're actually dumber than you think you are. You thought you were doing this. You thought you could do all this. None of your science worked. You actually have an emotional moment there. But instead, he's just kind of ranting to, well, the geometric shapes and the multicolored. Although I do actually kind of like Time Trapper's world as Byrne draws it, but there's nothing there. It's just like,
yeah. And that I guess motif stays around, like we talked last week, right? That motif stays around for many, many, many years, because we see that, I guess, in the late 90s with some of the Legion Time Trapper stories as well, which is kind of neat, and it's very evocative for sure.
Is this the first? I had always assumed this was like Byrne just doing what the Time Trapper realm kind of like looked like before.
No, this is the first one where we see this, all those geometric shapes and things like that. I believe so.
Yeah, like Cosmic Boy, they're in a castle. Like, they go to the castle at the end. He's always sort of shown more as like he's got this fortress that he's built, and it's very old style. So this is the first one that kind of brings him to the 80s. So it's a little bit more, yeah.
So that's the weird part about this book, which is this is also very foundational for things. We'll get into a thing that is established in this book that then no one thought would come back, and then Jeff Johns made it a permanent part of like DC lore.
Actually, I'm going to go and just correct something I just said here. So the first time we see this, I think, is actually in the prior Legion of Superheroes issue. So Greg LaRocque looks to be the person to have created this particular style. That's good, because the art's better anyway. So in addition to this old Time Trapper exposition, we see Superman falls to Earth, gets rescued by Pete, but Pete thinks it's young Clark, as in Superboy, and takes him to Ma and Pa Kent's house. And this particular little interplay was really interesting, I thought. Just one of those kind of neat sci-fi concepts of, if you had a mirror universe and you had the same people, would they be these archetypes, or how much would they be different from the people that you're used to? And so, because Clark is able to notice, hey, this is definitely Pete, but it's definitely not my Pete. And I can see these are Ma and Pa Kent, they're so old, but I can feel that there's the same kind of people. But everybody also looks at Clark like, oh my God, you just had red kryptonite or whatever it was, right? That's why you're so big.
It kind of makes me think of the modern trend in multimedia, or like multiversal media stuff, specifically the way they do with TV shows and movies, like the Spider-Man Not Far From Home. What was the one?
Homecoming?
Is it Homecoming? Yeah. Sorry, too many titles.
I know.
Or like the DC Crisis on Infinite Earths, or like the WB Crisis on Infinite Earths, CW, pardon me, where half the fun is like, we're going to bring back actors from different series to sort of like represent themselmes and be.
You mean Across the Spider-Verse? Is that what you were talking about?
No. Homecoming is the right one.
Okay,
not Homecoming. No, what, the third Spider-Man movie? The
No Way Home.
No Way Home. That's it. There we go. See, there's too many damn home titles, and
yeah.
So No Way Home, like where we bring in Tobey Maguire and we bring in Andrew Garfield, and it's like, yes, they are Peter Parker, but they are a different Peter Parker. And because of subtle things that are just different across the space-time continuums, like there's different nurture, there's different things, even though fundamentally you're the same person in all these ways. And that works because they're archetypally the same type of actor that you would have cast in these types of situations. So that all makes sense, and it works as an Easter egg for fans and yada, yada, yada. Here we get the particularly the Kents, because they are of a different age, but they have different, like Pa Kent, for example, has a full head of hair, versus we established in the issue prior, Pa Kent from the Byrne era timeline is balding much more dramatically. So there is a distinct difference to them. And Superman says they're cut from the same cloth, but they're not my Kents. So how different are they? At least in subtle ways that they are different. Meanwhile, like Pete Ross appears to be a spitting image of like young Pete Ross.
When I'm looking at kind of looking through the pages here, the two things that I think that this book is really designed around, maybe three things. And I guess this is adjacent to what you were saying, Ace, about them double tapping Superboy in the back of the head kind of thing. It's basically to bury a lot of this stuff, right? They basically get rid of Crypto because they use that gold kryptonite to take away his powers.
Here's another one. What the hell, man? When I was a kid and I first read this, I didn't think too much about it. But the second you actually put any thought into Crypto, a super smart dog's plan. And when I say super smart, I mean, he has thought bubbles and he's thinking out his plan.
Yeah,
and he's like, absolutely. Why don't I just expose myself to gold kryptonite far from the situation that needs to happen? It doesn't make any goddamn sense. What is his plan? Even when he's like, oh, I have to expose myself so that Superboy doesn't accidentally expose him. Take the gold kryptonite out of the basement.
Right. That's the thing. It seemed like the only plan was to nerf himself so that he could bark like a dog so that the Kents would come down and get the container of all the different kryptonites. Why not just bark as yourself? You're it's not like you don't bark as a smart dog.
It's ridiculous. That part is insane. And they're just doing it to be able to take out Crypto so that he is no longer a player in the story and in any future stories. Meanwhile, other thing that they're establishing is they're really laying on thick just how much more powerful Silver Age Superman is over the modern Superman.
Yeah.
And then a subtle thing that they kind of just did is, so the kryptonite, all the different colors of kryptonite are, they're stupid. They go over it because they do like a good job of explaining all the Silver Age stuff in this issue. And so that's the thing I like about this issue a lot. But then the fact that they have all the different colors and that those radiations don't work on Superman is a way of saying, no, we're not bringing back the other kryptonites. Those are all done. It's the only kryptonite is going to be the green kryptonite that we have in our book. Now, what's interesting about that is that prior to this, kryptonite was kryptonite regardless of which universe you were in. It never was an issue. Like Earth 2 Superman was affected by Earth 1 kryptonite all the time and vice versa.
Right.
And so that was always just an established part. And then when Jeff Johns did Infinite Crisis, he brought back the concept of the multiverse and said that kryptonites from different realities didn't affect Kryptonians from different realities. So, and that has become a canon thing ever since. And is one of the reasons why Superboy Prime is so dangerous, because they have no kryptonite from his reality to use.
Well, that's why Element Lad had to die in Legion of Three Worlds, right? Because he was the only person who could make kryptonite to stop Superboy Prime. And I'm sad that I know that, but there you go. You're entirely right. All of these points are just him going, this doesn't exist anymore. This doesn't work anymore. We're not dealing with this. And I agree with you on the Crypto thing. And I remember when I first read it as a kid, didn't really care. And yeah, as an adult reading it, you just go, this is the dumbest of dumb things. And I can't believe they did this. Even if you forget that he's a super dog, you just go, this is just such a dumb thing. Like, it's literally just, let's get rid of Crypto. And then you go, like, why even do it? Like, why have that aside from, I hate the Silver Age, or I hate Silver Age Superman stories. And then we get to something Byrne loves, which is the full page of Superman going on a speech of how everything's working and why he's able to win. And there's no backgrounds, which is the other thing Byrne loves. And like, we talk about him over explaining and having too many text boxes and too many dialogue balloons. But yeah, this is almost as bad as Man of Steel 6, which ends with just Superman monologuing for 4 pages?
Byrne likes a Superman monologue.
Yeah, I think you can get rid of Superman. Byrne likes a monologue. Like, he just loves, like he just loves doing that. And this is just this great monologue where he explains, like, oh, Superboy actually wanted me to defeat him, and he's actually a good guy. And then we kind of get that big, okay, Superboy's not actually bad, which I think is what they needed to do by the end of this story. I mean, obviously that, you had to. And then, I mean, I love the fact that it's more of that, like you talked about with multiple universes. I know the parents, and I know P. Ross, and I know this, so you've got to be a good person because I'm a good person, which of course Superboy Prime has proven is not the case. But
well, he had different parents.
The whole monologue is really just the kind of the most honest Rube Goldberg machine. Oh, all these things have to happen in order for the right outcome to be achieved. The reason for this whole thing to exist is so that you guys can punch each other and then make nice. But yeah, it's one of the many kind of challenges that I have with this particular book. I mean, I think in order for this story to work, you have to have that ultimate confrontation between Superman and Superboy to let all the Legionnaires free and kind of move on with the story. But man, there's some hard panels as part of this book.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to get a Superman Superboy hug, like that. There have been promotional images going back to the 80s of Superman and Superboy shaking hands or things like that, because they were such established different characters. And to have that little dynamic there is really good. And I forget if it's in this issue or if it's in the next issue where Time Trapper thinks, oh, it would have been really nice if this had happened alongside the Crisis. Like, he doesn't use those words, but I think it's in the next issue where it's like, oh, it would have been great if this could have just been erased with realities as the realities merged, kind of thing. We'll cross that dialogue if we pass it. But it feels like they're thinking back, being like, it would have been so much more elegant if we had come up with this solution before we got to the Crisis instead of now. And then that could have allowed them to not have to use Superboy Prime, because that's such an awkward insert. That's who's there in the Crisis just so that they can have Superboy, because Superboy's so important.
Here's another little funny thing that I'm just looking at some of the pages here. This is at the very end of the Action Comics issue where they go into the time bubble so that they can take Superman back to his particular universe. And the little dialogue box has 10 minutes and 10 years later. And then Superboy says, there's Metropolis, 1987, which then intimates that Superboy Smallville was in 1977, not the 50s version. So that kind of gives you this idea that they were actually doing a sliding time scale with regards to the classic Superboy environment.
Yeah, and that would work if anything in the Smallville looked like 1977,
right?
But it still looks like 1957, like
or
it's
1937,
drawn, like or 1937,
yeah.
It's drawn like it's always been that issue with Superboy of what time does it actually happen. I find it fascinating the way they did all this. I mean, again, as a Legion fan, I would have liked to have seen a little more Legion involved in this, but I get that you want the Superman Superboy thing. For me, it just kind of ends up feeling a little bit too dark and a little bit too empty when it gets to there. I would have liked, like you said, you talked about the hug. The hug is a great point. I kind of wish Superman had been a part of the last chapter. Like, writing him out, I thought was a bit of a mistake. We can talk about that. The other thing I was going to say, since you mentioned, it would have been great if they had thought about this during Crisis. And again, you can take John Byrne, memories with a grain of salt, but he basically said nobody at DC thought about this until it was too late. Nobody was considering this. So yeah, I wish during Crisis they had sat there and said, okay, we're going to cause a problem. But I don't think in Crisis they knew Superboy was going to go away. I don't think that happened until Byrne came over.
It's a good question. I think they certainly did not consult Paul Levitz ahead of time, or Karen Berger. No. I think a lot of this was just very stovepiped or tunnel thinking with regards to what they wanted to do, because they were like, oh, we need to update Superman. Here's how we're going to do it as part of this Crisis event. And we need to just modernize everything. Okay, let's just do it. And then, very little planning involved, I think, at least holistically.
Yeah, I think, Jay, to your point, because I agree. I think it makes no sense that they drop off Superman and don't just bring him along. Like he's down, and this could have been a handoff. Like this could have been their way of like modernizing the relationship that Superman has with the Legion of Superheroes going forward. But it feels very much that they wanted to say like, no, we are now separate properties. We do not have that relationship any. And it's challenging because you don't want to like take away Superboy's thunder in the last issue. You want to make sure that character gets the proper send-off that he does, or as good a send-off as he does, if not a better one. But it doesn't make sense from a story standpoint, and it could have been a excellent way of establishing a new status quo for the Legion of Superheroes to have a relationship with Superman, and especially if they couldn't go back anymore. Like if it was a scenario where they did have one team up, and so Superman will always remember them, and he does always remember them. This get really weird because when Superman has time and time again where he gets like, lost through time, he ends up in the 5 years later period of the Legion of the Superheroes and brings
started on that one
and brings up the Pocket Universe Superboy after the Pocket Universe Superboy gets written out of existence.
Oh, that whole thing! We'll probably get into this after
we'll talk
we finish the story.
Let's finish up the story.
That's going to be my rant that I'm going to unpin later on. All right.
So we get to issue 38, which is and I think I said the wrong artist the last time we talked about this cover. It's an amazing Bill Sienkiewicz cover on issue 38. It might be the most iconic Legion cover.
Certainly one of them. Yeah.
Anybody want to make a call for something bigger? I mean, one of the Dark said, yeah. This is up there
for sure.
And so we've got the Legion, and again, and not the whole Legion, just the 5 of them going back to the Pocket Universe to save the other 4. Which again, you kind of go like, you didn't want to get the rest of them. You didn't want like we wouldn't want to try to get the other Legionnaires.
Well, so they're in Smallville, where the frozen Legionnaires are in the basement, right? And then they just stop and say, "Okay, well, let's hop in the time bubble, Superman. We're going to take you back home." They do that round trip and come back, and then they unfreeze the Legionnaires instead of doing it all in one kind of motion. But whatever.
Yeah, it makes even less sense when like, oh, where they have to go is basically here.
Right.
Yeah.
So to your point of why didn't they just keep Superman around?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Because just imagine that. It's like, hey, I want to help. No. We're going to take this crazy trip that we might not be able to come back from because of everything that's going on with the Time Trapper, just because we can't use you. And I kind of got that sense of maybe that was a Superman editor who I think is Andy Helfer at the time going, nope, we don't want him in this final.
Actually, wasn't it Mike Carlin?
Well, regardless, I know that going into 5 years later, the Superman team was very much hands off our super characters.
Yes.
And even the Pocket Universe is too much. We need even less connection between them.
And that was a Mike Carlin edict. For sure.
Yeah, so this is definitely the Superman office saying that to the Legion office.
Yeah, Carlin had just taken over. He had just come over, taken over as editor. The Time Trapper is now, I'm guessing, going to destroy the Pocket Universe. That's the plan. So they have to save Smallville, or are you reading it differently from what I'm reading?
So yes, he's going to destroy it by way of sort of letting it collapse on itself, I think is his deal. Like he quote unquote made a machine that protected it from the crisis effects, which gets more into like the crisis has such a weird lasting impact on these DC. But so he had a machine that was maintaining it, and that he was going to turn it off if Superboy didn't do his bidding. And he was going to make the effects permanent somehow to protect everything if Superboy, fully did everything he said. He claims, if you take the Time Trapper at his word. And then the challenge becomes like, okay, now that the Time Trapper was pulled out, how do we stop the universe from collapsing in on itself because of the lingering effects of the crisis? And I guess the Time Trapper having to maintain this.
And what did we think of this final battle where we get to see Superboy, I guess, in action for, well, the last time until, when's the next time we see Superboy?
0 Hour. So I like this issue actually quite a bit. I like both of the Legion issues quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like,
so do I.
This is why I have made this a thing where I just keep on coming on podcasts to talk about specifically this story, because it's awesome. It's awesome and awful. And it's like that condescension of the Silver Age material that's in the Byrne stuff is really off-putting, especially in the context of this 4-issue arc, because the Legion, you have a reverence for Superboy. You have, because he's part of the foundation of the team. That this issue does a great job with it. There is so much weight in the aftermath of this, like in Mon-El's words in the aftermath of it, that is just astounding and contextualizes that relationship as being really important. I think that Superboy does a good job. They establish it well enough. Like, why does he die? He gave it his all. He took a bad hit, and then he pushed even further. But they do enough to sort of set up like why Superboy has to be the one to push them through time. He says that like, oh, I might be the only one who can actually do it now, because it seems that I have this ability to get to the 30th century under my own power. Makes enough sense. We're dealing with timey-wimey weird stuff just because of the Time Trapper. That's fine. I think Superboy gives a good last stand and does a really good job there. As a result, I do rather like the way he goes and the send-off he gets here, even though I think that it was coming from intent and requirements put upon the writing staff that was just they were just in a corner.
Well, I mean, I think the best thing about it is that it was certainly not an empty death at all, right? It was full of sacrifice, full of heart, and just a great moment. The first time I read it, I didn't, like I said, I picked up the issue as a back issue in the 90s. I had no idea what any of this meant. When I reread this as part of the Legion reread I did a few years ago, reading everything that came before and then hitting this particular moment was gut punch. I mean, it was pretty intense, and I would say that Levitz did a fantastic job putting this story down.
Yeah, I mean, if you're if you take everything into consideration that it's something he probably didn't want to write and probably something that he disagreed with vehemently, he gives Superboy as good of a send-off as you can get, because he's the center to the story. He's the one who makes the ultimate sacrifice, I'd say twice, right? He sacrifices to save his home, his home, and then he sacrifices to save the Legionnaires. And you look at those final 2 pages, the funeral. This is kind of when comics are at their best. Like, it's just these moments that just smack you, and you're like, oh yeah, this is a character I've known since I was trying to think. The first Superboy story I read, I would have been like 7 or 8 years old, and it's like, yeah, now they're gone. I mean, I do liken it to a lot of the, like when the Flash sacrifices himself in Crisis, and that, or Supergirl, and it's these big moments, or Supergirls, and you have to have these big moments, and this really works. And I have one quibble about this issue, and it has nothing to do with the story. It has everything to do with, after you see the clean inking work on both the John Byrne issues, and then you see the mess that is over Greg LaRocque, and that's my only criticism of this. Because LaRocque has said in interviews, I hated the way I was inked. And that's my only problem with this. The story is great. I think LaRocque does a great job for when you can see what he's doing. But there's times where it looks...
I disagree with that a little bit. I mean, because I think I prefer the art of the Legion books more than I do the Superman books. I guess if you're Greg LaRocque and you're going to be kind of pissed off about what you don't like, I thought he did a great job. I mean, we didn't really talk about this on the run through of the actual story, but there's that kind of splash page in the middle of the first issue with Dream Girl, and it's really amazing. It's a great shot. It has very little to do with the actual Superboy story, but it has a lot of interesting foreshadowing, and you see our good friend without the armpits foreshadowed there. But I think it's a beautiful picture, and I just prefer the Greg LaRocque pencils, I think, than over the John Byrne stuff, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to shout out at the funeral, specifically Mon-El's words have always resonated with me. Like, he called me his brother and took me into his home, and from the day we met, he thought of me every day of his life. Sleep well, Kal-El, Clark, my brother. That is such a beautiful encapsulation of the relationship, especially focusing on the Superboy side of things. Because, sure, you could imagine that Superman would be distracted and isn't as thinking about how can I free my brother from this. But we know that this Superboy specifically, when he says, oh, I just came back from the future where we found the cure to Mon-El's lead poisoning. So it's timey-wimey with Superboy anyway. Which version of Superboy is coming to the future now? Is it the Superboy that went on the last adventure with us, or is it the Superboy from 5 adventures ago?
Right.
It could be the situation. So this Superboy did have that relationship. And I think the page having everyone sort of say something is kind of a little over the top. It's nice that Duo Damsel has I really loved him. It's a little weird that she's saying that to her husband.
Well, that opens up a can of worms for the next multiple years in the Legion. I think it would have been better if you had just had Mon-El's speech, if it had just been that line. And I agree with you completely. And that's one of those where a writer who doesn't know the past and doesn't respect what's happened in the past doesn't write that line of dialogue. And one of the reasons why I think this is like Levitz's peak, I don't think another Legion writer has touched. And it's scenes like this that's why I say that. He captures this perfectly. Yeah. Thanks for calling that out.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite scene of a similar type is the eulogy for Supergirl at the end of the Crisis issue where she dies. But this is pretty close. Like, it's very short and to the point. But when you think about it from the context of that relationship between Mon-El and Superboy, and you really, I don't want to say romanticize it or glorify it, really play up that relationship between them as akin to brothers, especially from a perspective of a Superboy who at the time of meeting Mon-El didn't have anyone like him in the world and thought he was truly alone. And for the first time had someone who was like him and possibly from his world, and that meant so much to him there. And to see that relationship reciprocated by Mon-El is so nice. It's just a great moment there. Like the shot of Mon-El carrying Superboy, a limp Superboy in and then clutching him looks so great. Like I used the carrying Superboy shot in the Men of Steel art for it because it looked fantastic. There's a lot to like about this 4-issue series, even though the detour into 1980s Smallville with Superman and everything is kind of just there. It's a and then this happened and then this happened part, as opposed to and so this happened and so this happened. If Superman had joined them for the rest and so forth, it would have meant that whole sequence in Superman encountering the Legion and so forth would have had some payoff here as well.
Well, yeah, let me ask you that, Case and Jay, because this is something that I was thinking of as you all have been talking here, is were the Superman and Action Comics issues even necessary for this story?
Barely.
Could they have just done, could they have just done this as 3 stories instead of 3 issues of the Legion instead of 2 and just left the Superman stuff out?
You need a story beat there. You could have written around it, but I actually don't know what I would have done to like make Superboy come back to the side of the Angels that quickly. I guess he could have just brought them to the time trapper and they all unfroze because the stasis ray he had modified or something like that. But the way it's written, it's constructed so that another beat has to happen between those 2 Legion issues. Now, is that beat the 2 issues of Superman and Action Comics that we got? No, it's like I said, it's just a side story. It's a side quest.
Yeah, I would say, do I think it would have been a better story if it had just been 4 issues in the Legion and it wrapped up in issue 40? I think so. Because again, Levitz understood the gravity of all of this. And I never got that sense from Byrne. Like Byrne was just, I'm getting rid of these barnacles as I see them on Superman. And I think even just take Krypto's depowering. I think Levitz would have handled that better. So we wouldn't be sitting here 40 years later going, well, this is stupid. Why would he do this?
He would have at least assess the tragedy of it. Like this sentient entity is now just a dog.
Yeah.
I love dogs, but that is a tragedy. That is a Flowers for Algernon style tragedy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And instead of just blip and we're gone. And I think maybe Levitz realized that because I don't think Krypto shows up in 38, does he? Like he's just like I think he's just like, no, we're not dealing with any of this craziness. Sadly, I think the decision was not made for whether it was going to be a good story or not. I think it was, we want to wrap all this stuff up in Superman. And at this point in time, Superman's the better selling book. So it was probably better for the Legion to kind of be tied into that.
Yeah, from a sales perspective, I think it makes a ton of sense. I do want to be clear about that. Like from a story perspective, no. Like I don't think it does much. But from a sales and from a crossover standpoint, having the modern Legion interact with the modern Superman is a way of cross-pollinating your fans in a really good way. I wish there was more reverence to the Legion, because if the goal is to bring the people who jumped onto Superman because they followed Byrne from Marvel or something like that to be like, here's the wider DCU, it should have been more celebratory of it all. But as it is, the Levitz stuff does a pretty good job.
Like, I think in a perfect world, you would have gone Legion action, and then it would have been Superman and the Legion of Superheroes. Legion action, Superman and Superboy, and then Legion. And that's your 5-issue arc. So what you're essentially doing is you're reintroducing the Legion, like you just said, Case, to all the fans who came over from Marvel who don't know who these guys are. But you essentially have to redo the story. So the entire Legion is there. So we're getting more of these characters with the idea of this is going to push people to check out this book. And I think you have to have Superman in all 5 of those. It's kind of like that Action Comic storyline that like when he goes to the future and Earthman's become evil, you've got to have as many members of the Legion in there because you're introducing them to a new bunch of readers. And I think they should have taken that tone here, but I think it has to end in the Legion. I just get the sense, it's like we've made references a few times. I think the moment Carlin came into the Superman books, I think he was like, nope, you're not playing in our backyard. So maybe there was limits already there.
Yeah. Jay, I like your thought about it being 5 issues, because if there was one more issue in between the bookends of the 2 Legion issues, and we had Superman with the Legion participating in this, and then maybe he gets separated so that we don't have him there for the actual final battle where Superboy dies, then that could have worked as well, because then the character has some of that unification, like has a bit of a handoff there, but isn't present to diminish the role of Superboy in the last story. Could have been an interesting way to do it. And yeah, as it is, like the 2 issues, it's necessary for it to even be 2 issues because they're doing so much of a recap of all the Legion of Superhero stuff.
The problem with the recap is you're recapping stuff that is now no longer going to have happened because you've gotten rid of Superboy. So like instead you could have done hey, we're going to kind of show you what really happened. That could have been a better recap. Hey, Legion, you think that this was Time Trapper playing with you. again, there's so much they could have done. There was so many missed opportunities that they could have had fun with. One I was thinking is, to me, why not have Superboy sacrifice himself to save Superman? That's your finale. And then Superman, it affects him moving forward because he's realized, I have to be better, or I have to push harder, or whatever. There's so many things they could have done instead of, hey, we're going to spend 6 pages retelling you what happened last issue and what happened in 1958. Or they could have done so much more with this.
Well, I think it was more we have to resolve this Superboy thing as quickly as possible and make it make some kind of sense. And because the Superman books take precedence on on the DC tape, it was as simple as that, most likely.
So, can we talk about the knock-on effects?
Yes, yes. Well, I'm glad we're getting there because not only do you have the after effects in the Legion itself, so kind of as the result of all this stuff, you end up the next big, I guess, really big storyline in the Legion story. And I don't know if this is part of what you're going to be talking about, Case, is the whole the revenge mission where Mon-El and Saturn Girl and Duo Damsel and Night Girl, I think too, right? No, not Night Girl. Shadowlass go after the Time Trapper himself in an act of revenge. Girl. It was honestly, I said Saturn Girl. So, yeah. But it's an act of
Saturn
revenge.
Girl, Brainiac, Mon-El, and Ron Vidar, the Green Lantern.
That's right. Yeah.
So
that's the next big storyline, and there's repercussions from that still that happen too. And unbeknownst to me, this has even more effect across the DC universe, just the existence of this particular pocket universe. So, Case, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the Superman ones first because they're easier to kind of explain, because then we're going to just be like, here's the explanation of Legion history for a moment there. So the pocket universe persists is where we get the Matrix entity Supergirl, so here's the deal on the Matrix entity Supergirl. Because Superboy died, he never causes Lex Luthor from the Silver Age to lose his hair, and as a result, that Lex Luthor never goes evil. And so he is the one superhero left when the Kryptonian supercriminals, when Zod and his crew show up to come to Earth. And as a result, he tries to defend Earth, and one of the ways he does that is that he takes the genetic makeup of Lana Lang and combines it with this Matrix entity technology to create a Supergirl who doesn't quite look like Lana Lang, but is able to look like Lana Lang because she's a shapeshifter and it has all kinds of weird powers, and then sends her back in time and across realities to the main Earth, whatever you want to call it, the post-crisis Earth. She's frozen in ice, and then the end arc of the Byrne Superman book is him finding this Supergirl, her explaining that that pocket universe has now been laid waste and almost all life is wiped out except for Smallville, which has a force field around it because of orbital bombardments from Kryptonians. And then they go through, we get the whole Superman murders the super criminals because they're so powerful that he has to use that kryptonite against them. He gold kryptonites them first and then uses a green kryptonite to actually kill them. And this becomes a whole big thing for Superman. This is why he goes into his exile arc where he is haunted by the memories of killing these 3 super criminals, even though it's because they had promised that they were going to come and that Superman was not powerful enough to stop them. Even if you had 3 Supermen, we've established that Kryptonians from this reality are so much more powerful that it doesn't goddamn matter. Now, the Matrix entity Supergirl has tried to move away from because it's really hard to explain, and her power is really weird. So even when she got her own series, they depowered her quite a bit and then changed her powers around so that she was more in line with the regular Superman power sets. There's the Earth Angel stuff and everything. I'm not going to get into all that.
Okay, I was about to ask that.
Yeah.
I was about to ask, is that the one who becomes an angel?
Yes,
and I was
yes.
like,
She becomes an angel, and then she becomes not an angel, and that final form is like mostly akin to a Superman, except for she has psychic glass instead of heat vision. Then we have, like I said, there's the Time and Time Again story where Superman is hurled through time and interacts with Laurel goddamn Gand and talks about the death of Superboy and how he knew about it, which is such a strange detail there because, as we're about to talk about, that shouldn't be possible. Like the whole memory of all that should be gone.
Yeah, looks like I picked the wrong week to stop sniffing glue. This drives me nuts.
Yeah, let's explain the 5 years later stuff, because for a long time, until I actually read 5 years later, I just assumed that they did the 5-year gap. And when we came back, it was Valor and Laurel Gand was there, and they just like hand waved it. And that is not the case. You do the 5-year gap, and then you have Mon-El killing Time Trapper. Then you have the Mordru-verse, and then you have the Gloranth-verse.
Yeah, and this is where, and we haven't had an actual specific dedicated episode on 5 years later yet, and I'm sure we'll have the same discussion when we do this. But yeah,
are you going to do one episode on 5 years later?
I don't know. I don't know.
It's going to be no.
Yeah, because you could actually you could break it up into at least
like
3.
I've got the Omnibuy like right next to me. They are
I have mine. Mine are right over here. And it's. This just drove me nuts, right? Because, when you read the oral histories of what was going on at the time, they make the time jump into 5 years later with Giffen. So Paul Levis has moved on. He's doing more back office stuff at this point. So it's Keith Giffen and Tom and Mary Bierbaum running the show here. And they do the 5-year jump in continuity. All great. And they are told by, and this is the way the story goes. So if anybody has any more updated information on this, please reach out to the podcast, longlivelegion2025@gmail.com. They go through and Carlin's office says, no, you can have no ties at all to the Superman universe. It sounded like they were going to have Laurel Gand in there anyway. So that's probably fine. You can still have that little story. But the bigger problem, as you're alluding to, Case, is that you have somebody named Mon-El as a character. And thou shalt have no references to Krypton anywhere else other than Superman. And so with the Legion, this is a big problem. So instead of, and Case, you kind of like a little bit stole my thunder here about this thing that drives me nuts.
Sorry.
Is that, no, it's fine, but because it's a great conversation topic. I still think to this day that they did not need to over-explain all that stuff just to say Mon-El is now Valor. I think they could have not had the Mordru-verse, as good as some of those stories are, as interesting as those are to read. From a continuity perspective, I don't think they needed to do that, because at the end of the day, I think it did two things. It made the Legion history and continuity vastly more confusing than it needed to be, than it already was. And B, it slowed the momentum of the ongoing story that they were trying to tell at the time. And so the combination of those two things was the first kind of anchor in the momentum that they had when they were trying to tell this 2 years worth of stories. And the first year of 5 years later, I think I will argue that is a great set of stories if you take it as a whole. But each year after that, because there's a little more tweaking here and there, every year there's always something else extra that they're doing to kind of tweak this continuity. And the time and time again stuff happens in the second year. You're just left wondering, what the hell? Why did you do this? Because you just said earlier, you can't have any references to Superman. Now, all of a sudden, here's Superman. Why?
Right. Yeah. And he has foreknowledge, or not foreknowledge. He has, I guess, foreknowledge from the sense that it's stuff that happened in the future. He has knowledge of the Pocket Universe Superboy's death. He had no way of knowing any of the follow-up story from after the point he was dropped off. And he has a conversation with Laurel Gand, who is, of course, the replacement for Supergirl in all the stories once we go into the Gloranth-verse. Now, I will say, I think part of this is that they got screwed after they started 5 years later. Like, I maintain that
sure.
Like, if they had known that they were doing this and just did 5 year gap, and it's Valor instead of Mon-El now, and like Laurel Gand is there, and we're good.
Yep,
that would have been fine. But they had started, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, actually we have to write out the whole Kryptonian connection with Mon-El.
Yeah, but I think they could have done that in just a couple of pages. Honestly, I don't think they needed to have as much of a whole separate issue that changed the universe and. Actually issue and a half, because you have the whole Mon-El Time Trapper confrontation, and then you have the Mordru-verse story, and then you get back to the story at hand. So I think that was just extra that didn't need to be done, and they could have just kind of whistled past the graveyard, so to speak.
Well, didn't need to be done is a good way of describing a lot about 5 years later.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
I like 5 years later. I'm probably like, part of this is because I'd heard a lot about it and then like came to read it as an adult, only when they published the Omnibuy where able to read it.
Right.
Like I like 5 years later, but there's so many head scratching, even down to the Omnibuy. The fact that it's the SW6 Legion on both covers is frustrating for me, because that doesn't make any sense. But the SW6 gets so weird, and then we get into how they try to reconcile everything for 0 Hour, and that's where it gets even stranger.
Well, here was where I was going to break your brain a little bit on that. part of Time and Time Again has a kind of a tie-in with the Reboot Legion. So there is one issue of the Reboot Legion where there's a crossover as well.
Really?
Yeah, I need to dig it up. I'll see if I can find it while we're having this conversation.
So like once the Reboot Legion comes out, they then like tie back into the Time and Time Again Superman story.
Well, yeah, it's a weird thing because it's like an alternate universe Legion, and it's like it maps back to a particular episode. I'll see if I can find the thing.
Okay.
While we're here,
when we kind of go back to this whole death of Superboy and whatever, and Jim, you mentioned this, is I think Giffen and the Beer Bombs basically said, here's a problem that we have. What's the most convoluted way that we can solve it? And in some cases, it might not have been a problem. How easy would it have been to say Mon-El was dead, or we believed he was dead at the start of 5 years later because of what happened when they fought Time Trapper? They didn't even need to bring him back and say, yeah, he's Mon-El. They could have just let it go, or they could have said, because Superboy's dead, I can't use that name anymore. I want a new name. I'm going to go by Valor. Done. Hands, like everything's clean. But it seems like if there was ever an option in 5 years later of what's the easy path or what's the incredibly convoluted path, it was convoluted every single time. And you can say like it's because of this story, but I don't know. Like, okay, is this a great resolution for Superboy being part of the team? Obviously, it's not perfect. Obviously, there's problems, but you didn't have to break everything to try to solve the problem. Like you could have just said, how do we make the fans happy? Or how do we keep this simple for new readers? But again, 5 years later, it's nothing simple. So.
Well, Jay was talking there. I looked it up. So it's Adventures of Superman 476, which is part of the Time and Time Again storyline. There is a Legionnaires issue, and this is Legionnaires number 61, which was, let me see, this is published in 1998. So they do a 7-year callback on this. And so it's one of those issues where there's some timey-wimey stuff happening, and Jeff Moy gets to draw some of the classic Legionnaires in their more classic types of outfits. And so, yeah, they have an encounter with Superman, and it references that.
Sorry, give me that Legionnaires issue again.
Legionnaires 61.
61. Okay, excellent. I have that, and I will be reading that after we get off this call.
So, yeah.
So this is brought back for 0 Hour, where they try to square the circular peg or vice versa of the SW6 Legion, and at the same time bring back Superboy, and they're like, oh, how could we forget you? Like, which gets into the whole strange element of like the way time is like wrapping up towards the end of the 5 years later period, where it's all these elements are sort of in canon with themselves for a moment there as timey-wimey is kind of shifting around. It's very hyper time in its concept right there, like that sometimes Wally has blue eyes, sometimes he has green eyes kind of thing. And so they bring back the Superboy, who we get a very brief appearance, and then they kind of forget him. It's like, who was that? I believe is what they say right after he disappears. And then he disappears.
A lot of the characters that were in and out of the Legion at that time too. Yeah.
And then that Superboy goes back in time and meets the Con-El Superboy, or at the time just Superboy, because he didn't have a secret identity at that point. He was just Superboy. And we get a nice like handoff of the Superboy role there, which is a much more loving tribute to the Silver Age Superboy material.
I think it, like I said before, like with the burn stuff, taking away things that you didn't know you were going to miss. And it almost seems like that's been the biggest course correction, or that's been the biggest effect. And it was true in the Superman titles where we missed this, bring it back. And I think it's true with the Legion titles as well. Is everything they took away, every Legion writer afterwards has been like, we got to get this back. Like, just think how many different times has a different Superboy shown up in the Legion, because every writer is like, we want this. When we talked about
how many times have they had a blonde, super strong woman in the Legion that's just been supposed to replace Supergirl? Like, we've got Andromeda, we've got Laurel, like if you consider Laurel and Andromeda as separate characters, and then you got Thunder.
You realize like these are things that everybody wants to have. Like when we talked about Foundations, months ago, and there, that great full page shot of Superboy in the old Superboy costume with the Legion belt buckle, and everybody wants to see this. We want these characters to be on these teams. You realize the history is important. You realize that these characters are necessities. Even 3-Boot brings Supergirl back as the only good character on the team. Sorry, everybody who's fans of 3-Boot. Yeah. Couldn't miss that one.
Like, I think, like, here, this gets into a thing I wanted to talk about, which is how, like, fundamental is Superboy to the Legion? Jim, you came in from the reboot standpoint, and I did too. And so it's not hard for me to just say, oh, it is just 20th century or 21st century superheroes that were the inspiration, regardless of which one in particular. I think that the Legion can survive without Superman, but the continuity can't, because I would argue that the 5 years later reboot stuff, no one calls it a reboot because it's like small retconning that was going on in there. That one they could have weathered. Yeah. The reboot era by itself would have been fine. The 3-boot is what broke the Legion as a whole, because because all of a sudden it became like, well, now if you're doing the Legion, you're doing your own version of the Legion.
Exactly. I completely agree. I think that from my point of view, coming in when I did, I don't think Superboy is needed as an inspiration at all. I think, in fact, they kind of allude in the beginning of that era that the Justice League is more, they say that, I think they kind of more genericize it and call it the Age of Heroes, but it's it's basically the Justice League, right? It's a super team. I thought the Teen Titans could have also been another good way of being an inspiration for the obvious reasons. But had editorial on the back end really committed to the bit, I think we would have been in a much better spot. But yeah, to your point, right? They have the whole 3-boot restart, and it's just like, come on, guys, what are we doing here? And I think I've heard a couple of different stories on this. I have heard that the original pitch was for that version to basically be the reboot characters, but just you fast forward the timeline a few years.
Yeah, 5 years later for the reboot era, yeah.
Yeah, almost. But then the way that I hear it was that editorial, Dan Didio, it was the one who said, no, this needs to be something completely new. And then so Mark and Barry had to go and essentially draft up all new stuff. So
yeah, which, like, the editorial kind of thing, sometimes they have good instincts, sometimes they don't. I was a big fan of the Matrix Entity Supergirl, and for a long time I was like, no, we shouldn't have other Kryptonians. But I have to say, it was Dan Didio who pushed for Supergirl to be Kara Zor-El again, and that was the right choice. As much as you might like other versions of the characters, but side note, in the list of blondes, also Matrix Entity Supergirl has been previously linked up with the Legion when they were back in time.
That's true.
Because they had to have a Brainiac 5 crossover annual in there.
Yeah.
But like, so sometimes editorial wanting to get back to basics is not a bad choice, and saying that the reboot had gotten too convoluted and so forth isn't by itself. And I'm not saying that it was too convoluted, but I'm saying
I don't think it was at all.
If editorial thought it was, or that it needed a fresh start, it's that once you do it the second time, it becomes a trend.
Yeah, it comes easier.
And then that's why now it's every single time. Because if you look at Crisis, the future was set and the past was in flux. The Legion was a successful book, and so it wasn't affected by the Crisis, at least not directly. It's only because the past was changed, and then it was like, how do we make this all make sense, that it had to get basically like chopped up and spat out in the weirdest possible ways that you could get into, as much as I love it all.
You're right. I mean, we're starting to talk about a little bit of where the Legion's kind of gone wrong from the perspective of all the different versions that there've been. There's also other tales of people in either editorial or writers and things like that just being told generically from people, and this is that the Legion is too confusing. And I think people take that the wrong way, and I think people hear too many of certain voices, and that makes that kind of informs the decisions that they make, and they may not be the correct decisions. Obviously, when we were talking to Paul Kaminsky, there was the whole question of, well, if you can understand the X-Men, you can understand the Legion, because they're just as confusing. There's just as many characters. There's just as confusing timelines and continuities and things like that. There's no reason to, just keep hitting a reset button and make things even worse.
Right. What we're missing for the Legion now is a Krakoa era, like an additive era that is not removing anything. I mean, a 3 worlds kind of approach would sort of cover it, but that's getting into like more speculative stuff. I think it's worth us having this conversation on this episode, because this is the point where it starts to fork.
Absolutely.
The Superboy stuff is what causes Legion continuity to start spiraling out of control.
Agree.
Yep,
Agree. And then who knows? And maybe we'll be very lucky, and maybe the new book that's coming out from Joshua Williamson will have this more unifying effect versus yet another forking of the road.
Yeah. Now, I've heard a rumor that what became the Krakoa era of X-Men had also been floated around as a Legion pitch.
I had
that too.
heard something similar to that as well. But yeah, I don't know the specifics around
Yeah,
it.
I don't know well enough, and it could have just been that it was started as an X-Men thing, and then there was like, could you file out the serial numbers and bring it over to Legion instead, kind of thing, and then ultimately still was X-Men or whatever. But it is interesting to think about because Legion is that other book that really has that sprawling cast of characters and all the weird stuff that can go into it, and the same kind of 80s glory age.
Yeah. Yeah.
Legion and Titans were the two books that DC had, and X-Men was the big book that Marvel had at the same time. And if you were reading all three, you were eating really well.
And Case, you're talking about the Hickman ideas.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I had heard things very similar around that, but again, I'm not sure what any particular details around that would be.
Yeah, no, it's funny to think about. Actually, it's funny to think about the Legion having like an orgy island. If you look at like the 70s costume designs.
That was 3 Boot as well.
Yeah, 3 Boot kind of was that way as well, to some degree. But yeah, I mean, I'd always kind of been interested to see what a Hickman Legion would be like. So, who knows? Who knows?
Well, at this point, I've gotten to the point where I would just like somebody who loves the characters to take over, and I don't care who it is. Because obviously Bendis didn't. So you need somebody like that. I wanted to circle back to the question you asked about Superboy's connection to the Legion, or where they should be. Like, what should the connection be? And since I grew up on it as a kid, I actually think Superboy should be the inspiration. I think that's a big part of the Legion. I don't like it when they say it could be the Justice League or it could be this. I like the idea of having this character. And I really liked, and I know we like slamming on Jeff Johns here. I actually really liked the way he played with it of Superboy needed the Legion just as much as the Legion needed Superboy. That was his place to kind of be himself and learn.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that was the other side of it, which is that I do really like, and just what you said, that Superboy really needed it. That Clark having that club of friends when he's a teenager and by himself, what was really important for him. And so I think the Legion actually gets by better without Superman than Superman gets by without the Legion. I like the Byrne era stuff, but like the stuff I really love, that Silver Age quality of the character, him having the sort of the weird worlds that he's connected to and everything, where he's got a Fortress of Solitude that has alien artifacts from him flying around space and has these wonderful friends in the far future that have its own kind of dynamic, and everything is so a part of what makes Superman special in a way that he's not just a superhero, but he's this archetypal superhero.
That's from the Superman and the Legion story from Jeff Johns. I mean, I think that's what it got really right. You had references to those kind of things, and you had the entire Legion. That's part of what made it work, was some of the Silver Aginess of that particular story.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think Superman needs the Legion, and yet, ironically enough, I think the Legion is better without Superboy or Superman actually in the book. I think it's great when they're kids. Because the problem is, as soon as Superboy or Superman enters the team, they all move to the background. And Superboy saves everything, and the rest of them just kind of stand around. Whereas I much prefer the Legion where Superboy is that guest star who shows up twice a year. And give me the rest of the team. Because at the end of the day, the Legion doesn't really need Superboy. They have Mon-El. If it's 5 years later continuity, they have Laurel Gand.
If it's 5 years later, they have 2 Mon-Els and 2 Laurel Gands.
Yeah, and they've got so much power that they almost don't need this character there. And what ends up happening, especially if you're reading Bronze Age, everyone just stands around and they're like, "Hey, Superboy, can you fix everything?" And he just shows up.
Oh yeah, like a character that I always feel gets undervalued because he's on a team with so many heavy hitters is Ultra Boy. Like Ultra Boy has such a cool power set in that he has the Superman power set, but only one at a time. Yes, I know some of them are stronger. I got called out on my video on Ultra Boy for that. I'm like, no, I even said he's stronger individually. But Ultra Boy like is on a team with Mon-El and Superboy and Supergirl, and when he's the 4th heaviest hitter on the team, but if you put him on any other scenario, any other team, he would be the standout character that you could do really dynamic action sequences because he has to switch his powers. But instead, he's just sort of there. He's with Superboy and Mon-El in the final fight against the Time Trapper, but he can't be the one to take the final hit because his power set specifically prevents him from being that do everything character.
Or even to kind of go a little bit more modern, there's a bunch of Legionnaires that if you put them on any other team, Wildfire would be the heaviest of heavy hitters on half of the DC super teams, and they don't even put him in that category with the Legion. Exactly your point. And so to me, the Legion, when it's the classic of classics, Great Darkness Saga, like Superboy only pops into that twice. And for the most part, he's been moved to the background. And I kind of like him there with the Legion. I like him as just kind of somebody else. But again, the flip side, I think he has to be the person that they idolize. And I think the big one is the person they want to hang out with. I don't want to get rid of that either. Just imagine, I kind of think of it like when you were 15 years old, 16 years old, if you had had a chance to, I mean, I don't know who your hero would be, but if somebody said like, hey, you can go back in time and go hang out with, let's see, like your favorite, like in my case,
like
I
Bass
grew up
Reeves or something like that, like some sort of the larger than life figure of the past. Yeah. I mean, if we're talking 1,000 years, I mean, we're talking about like William Wallace. No, William Wallace was like the 1500s.
Well, the point stands.
Yeah, I want to go hang out with Genghis Khan.
Yeah. Well, but yeah, I mean, 1,000 years ago, like the Norman Conquest was 1,000 years ago. So. Yeah. 66. So yeah, if you wanted to go back to a specific era there, that would make a ton of sense. Let's go hang out with Beowulf.
Another good example of this, I think, is the Legion of Superheroes animated series from 2006, because they use Superman as the inspiration. They go back and get him, but he's actually Superman. He's only Superman just because he's over 18 and he hasn't actually done anything Superboy related, because of course that whole thing was a matter of a rights issue. But it was an interesting way of doing it, and still having that recognition of the importance of Superman and interaction from a team dynamic, because he hadn't really learned how to use his powers.
Again, when it's done well, animated series does it well, you can see how important it is. One good thing about the animated series is you get to have Superman play stranger in a strange land for the whole thing, which I think is another key part of the Legion too. That juxtaposition of Smallville, where he knows everybody and it's this tiny town and it's actually 1930s, and then he goes forward and he knows nothing. That's always a nice touch of this transfer back and forth.
He's basically a cipher for the viewer, even though he has superpowers and we don't. So let me ask you guys a couple of quick questions. Why is this storyline important? Why should somebody who's new to the Legion specifically, and maybe they're coming on board now with a new book, why should they read this particular story and go back in time in 30 years or whatever it is at this point?
Well, I think it does a good job of explaining the Silver Age Legion to a new reader. It's assuming that you're coming in for the Superman issues, at least, not knowing anything about the Legion. As long as you're taking the perspective on it with a grain of salt, I think that that's really good. I think it does a really good job of selling the importance of Superboy in the Legion's world, particularly with Mon-El. I think they do a really good job there. I think that the border issues are well written. I think the interior issues are well drawn. So I think there's something to enjoy in every issue here, even if it is showing its age in a lot of ways. And you can see that it was something that they were scrambling to figure out how they were going to explain this very important character to one set of continuity, while at the other side, that continuity was completely wiped away. And you can see the struggle, and it's impressive, even if it's not ultimately fully successful.
I would say if you are new to the Legion and you've never read a Legion book, and so I'll just kind of think in that terms, I think this is essentially the last chapter of the Levitz run, because I think after that, especially when Giffen comes on with issue 50, the tone of the book changes dramatically. So this is a really important keystone moment for the Legion. It's changing the Legion from the, I don't even want to say smiley, happy soap opera version of the past to this much darker tone. So it might be the last chance to enjoy that Silver Age influence. And I think that influence is gone after this, and it just gets into a much more darker 80s. I think the other one as well is this is one of the better send-offs of a main character that you're going to read. It's up there. I agree. It's not to the same level of Supergirl in Crisis, but it's in that range, and you get to see how important this character was, especially at a time when, Superboy keeps kind of going back and forth. Like, is this character important? Do we need them? Especially if you only know the Superman characters from the movies, that character doesn't exist. So this shows you why this character matters. And I think that's a big key to it as well.
Levitz stays on for sure through the end of V3 run, but I agree that you definitely see, I don't know, I don't think it really turns until you get to the 5 years later, but there's certainly more of a cynical view in the Legion, I think.
Yeah. Well, they're playing catch up because you get things like Laurel Kent, and her reveal as being a manhunter.
So the Laurel can't reveal. So it's another destruction of a Silver Age concept, although she came in the Bronze Age. Then you get that whole Starfinger storyline where they're actually kind of semi getting tortured at certain points. And then when Giffen comes on, that art style is so dark and just grim, and the stories become grim. Like the end of Emerald Empress is just a grim story. I mean, it's really good, but it's
Magic Wars is the same way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then Magic Wars, yeah. Like it's gone down this, and I think those are the steps that are leading to 5 years later. And then when Levitz leaves the book, and we get 5 years later, it's Giffen getting to say like, okay, I'm going to do. I mean, I don't know if he ever said this. It's like he's doing his version of the Watchmen. And the other one, and I hate to say this, I know Levitz wanted to be off the book at this point, and I think this might have been his last big hurrah. I could be wrong on that. You just get the sense that he's ready to go, and this is a nice.
Yeah, I think as my memory serves, he was supposed to go up until 50, which is where that Revenge Against the Time Trapper arc ends, and then hand it off. But I think they coerced him to stay for like another year or something like that. I agree with pretty much everything that you guys have said. If you're really serious about understanding the history of the Legion, especially at this time frame, it's definitely something you want to read. And especially if you ever decide to read the Legion from the beginning, from the Silver Age, or even from the start of the Bronze Age, or from the Levitz stuff at the very latest, it's definitely something you have to read, because not only is it important from the history of the book, but it's also a fairly dramatic story beat when you look at the grand scheme of the Legion. So very, very important to read this story, I think.
I know we're putting you on the spot. So Case, is there anything that you're reading right now that you'd want to recommend? You'd want to say, hey, this is something you should check out?
Yeah, I'm doing a reread right now of Transmetropolitan that you guys are both aware of for a project.
Are we?
So Transmetropolitan was a really fun series from the 90s that it's Warren Ellis who has become a little more controversial in recent years, but it is Hunter S. Thompson in a sci-fi setting. And it's fun to kind of go back because it is very political and very prescient of some of the things in the world. And so it's just kind of fun to be like, yeah, this is why I'm a big old lefty now.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be reading Year of the Bastard pretty soon, so that should be that's right down my alley.
We'll just say to everybody, start reading Transmetropolitan if you hadn't. You'll know more as we get to that. Jim, anything you recommend?
Yeah, so my big kick that I'm on now, which is like a year and a half long delayed, is Astro City. Like a year ago, 2 years ago, I picked up the first two phone books or Metro books of Astro City. And a couple of weeks ago, I read through the first one. And man, I got to tell you, it was so good. I mean, it's a Kurt Busiek, and it's one of those alternate DC universe kind of things because it's under an Image label, but you can absolutely tell who the analogs are for all the different characters. But the way it's written is kind of the magical thing where it's very much character centric, whether that character might be one of the heroes or it's just some random dude on the street. And you're just really immersed into this world that is very similar because you have all the comic book archetypes, but it's very, very different. And you don't know where it's going, but the fact that the character stories are very evocative, it really builds the emotional investment and makes it a great read. I can't wait to pick up the second one, but I have a lot of other reading on my plate first. So
but Astro City, especially doing a first read of Astro City, I'm like envious of you right now because it's so good.
I hadn't read it before and it was wonderful. Yeah.
Have you gotten to the Hanged Man story where it's the guy who remembers a woman?
Yes.
Yes.
And it was really cool because I was trying to get to the point of like, who is the Hangman? What the hell is he doing? Again, it was a wonderful moment because the main story is about some dude, some rando that you're kind of following as part of the story. But again, it's so well told.
But it's how like little things, the big stuff in the comics have impacts in these little ways on people.
There's another story about a guy who just moves into Astro City with his family. And he's like, God, do I belong here with all this stuff going on? And so all those big events happen outside the character's view. He's just a regular guy, so you just see everything happening to him. But the story is really one about community and how people can come together. Just wonderfully written. I just can't say enough. So Metro Book 1 is definitely something you got to pick up if you don't have it already.
Yeah, I can't recommend that strongly enough. if you're a fan of any comic book, and it doesn't matter, Marvel, DC, like the amount of love that's on those pages, it's just a perfect series. I echo Case's comments. I wish I could experience that again, because there's the one Samaritan story, which I say is one of the best Superman stories ever written, and it's not Superman. Like, it's just this perfect issue of what Superman's life would be, and it's not him. And yeah, just brilliant. Since we're all doing old stuff that we're rereading, or series that are long out of print, I'm going to go with the one that's on the shelf just up above me, which is Lone Wolf and Cub.
Nice.
I mentioned it on Blue Sky as one of my favorite. I know it's not really an independent comic, but it's independent enough. So Lone Wolf and Cub, if you've ever seen the movie, of course I'm going to blank on the name now. Thank you very much. Road to Perdition. Thank you. Road to Perdition is basically the American version of this book. And the premise is you have this samurai who's the executioner in feudal Japan. He is betrayed by another family who are the Yagyu family. His wife is murdered, and he takes his infant son on a mission of revenge, and he becomes a paid for assassin. So like what's really funny is, so he becomes known as Lone Wolf, which is, I'm going to get all this wrong, like Kozuro Kami, which also is somewhat close to his own name. My Japanese pronunciation is horrible. You can literally just get lost in the art. Like, it is some of the best black and white art that you will ever see. Frank Miller has said, like, this is my biggest influence when I was doing Daredevil.
Yeah, and he contributed the covers to the trades when they first were republished.
Yeah. So when they did, I've got both the first issues when they first got reprinted in regular size, and then Dark Horse reprinted them in manga size. Miller's got some artwork. Bill Sienkiewicz has done some covers, but it's just gorgeous. The stories are amazing. If you have any interest in Japanese history, especially feudal history, if you love samurai movies, this is the book for you. Yeah, I can reread those every couple of years and just love them. And one of the best endings to a series, just a perfect ending. So you're not going to be disappointed. There's no part where it sinks. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know, Case, you're a big fan as well. We could,
for real. I will say, I finally saw the movies more recently, because like for a long time, my best friend raved about the movies, and then I checked out the comics and I raved about the comics, but I'd never seen the movies. I finally watched the movies. They are badass.
I know. I own all of them.
Yeah.
I have DVDs of some of them. That's how, before Criterion released them. We could go off on this for a while, but yeah, the movies are like 70s Japanese, huge splurts of blood and like
so much
massive action sequences. Like it's everything you want out of Saturday night. I'm just going to relax, but the plots are still really good. The stories are really good, and they do a great job turning the comic into a movie. That's what's most impressive. Yeah, Jim, we're gonna put you down this rabbit hole at some point in time, so it's gonna be fun. Or one day when we have time, that'll be another podcast. It'll just be Case and I ranting.
There you go. That'll be my day off.
I will do. Jim, you have to read these now. There's only it's only going to cost you X amount of money to get all these books.
I know those are those giant. Yes. Or aren't they the giant books that look like the omnibus size?
No, they're actually tiny. Like are they? Okay. Yeah, the tiny manga ones. I've got them all in that, and it's like 30 individual volumes that are about like an inch and a half thick, but like they're what, like 5-inch tall books or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're like little paperbacks.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to try to pull one down, but yeah. And and it's once you read one or two of them, you're just going to get hooked. Like it's just
right. Excellent.
Gorgeous.
Fantastic. So, love the recommendations. Love them. Lots of good stories. This is why comics are so much fun, right? We get to have all kinds of great stories.
And plug for a sister show of this, Trade School, where if you have comics that you find a lot of fun, we on Trade School every week a guest host talks for 5 to 15 minutes about a comic book trade paperback that they love and why they love it. Yeah, that's a great series that if you listeners want to just ramble for 15 minutes about why you love a trade paperback, we would love to have your submissions. And if you are looking for recommendations of great comics, that's also just a great podcast to check out. It's available on the YouTube channel for Certain POV Media, but also on its own podcast feed. And like is great recommendations. Every guest has brought a book that I did not expect. It's just wonderful to see this positivity in comics.
Well, while you got the mic there, Case, where can people find you? Talk about the CPOV network. What podcasts are you on?
Yeah, so Trade School is of course the newest show that we've launched for CPOV. CPOV is a podcast network that was started about 10 years ago now. Wow, that I've been a part of since the beginning. and now the steward of the website and the Discord server and all that. But it's a great community of nerds that just love just bringing positive messages about some kind of material, be it comic books, be it video games, be it whatever. So in addition to producing Trade School, I also am the host of Another Pass, which is a movie analysis show where we talk about movies from the perspective of the time of production, what could have been done to fix them. And then every 5 episodes, we look at movies that had issues during production and overcame them as a proof of concept. And then I'm the host of Men of Steel, which is a Superman and Superman adjacent love letter show where we just talk about the power fantasy of being Superman and cool stories about either Superman or characters like Superman or whatever. We find ways to justify a lot of things on that show, but both are from the perspective of trying to be really positive about the material we're discussing, because we don't want it just to be like, pooping on anything. But then in addition to that, I also run the Certain POV Media a YouTube channel, which has all of that. Plus I do videos on like D&D stuff and like other kind of topics. If I have a video in me, I will put it up there is basically what happens. And yeah, so that's all the stuff I work on. And you can find me on socials at Case Aiken on most platforms, except for Instagram, where I'm holding on for dear life to my AIM screen name from high school. And that AIM screen name from high school had lots of conversations about all the books we recommended today. And that is Quetzalcoatl 5, Quetzalcoatl 5.
Oh, why don't you also talk a little bit about your Patreon page? Because I know one of the things that you kind of mentioned this, because you had an article about the many different kinds of reboots that can affect comic books on your Patreon.
Yeah, so I have the Patreon for Certain POV Media, and that is dedicated to the stuff that I'm working on directly. And every week I do 2 essays at the free tier. So one is a general nerd conversation essay that I'll do. And so like one time I was just thinking about Legion reboots. And so I just did a whole essay about like the original sin of Legion reboots. And then the other essay I'll do is a TTRPG thing, because I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons nerd and am constantly talking about that with my friends. So it just made sense for me to like ramble about D&D stuff at least like once a week on that. But there's also all kinds of advanced materials. And there's also like shout outs for people who are or at the executive producer level. But yeah, just trying to make it a worthwhile Patreon for people. But even at the free tier, I really feel like it really gives a lot of value.
Absolutely. And I love reading them. It's everything from, like you said, the Legion to anything D&D to phones. I mean, it's all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah. If I'm a nerd about it, I'll talk about it at some point.
Absolutely. All right. Okay, Jay, where can folks find you?
All right. So I've got my weekly column doing my Legion rereads. It's at jmlonglivethelegion.blogspot.com. And just recently I had my first non-Legion book, because it was all part of the last stand of New Krypton, and I didn't realize that they didn't appear in Action Comics, so there we go. But we got to talk about Nightwing and Flamebird and all of those other fun things. You can find me on Blue Sky at jmckernan.bsky.social, and you can find me on Discord or on Reddit with my username Drake Burrows. So Jim, where can everybody find you?
So I have my Legion Reviews website at jimboslegion.blogspot.com, where I try to post a new comic a week that is somehow Legion related. Not been very successful lately. You can find me personally on Blue Sky at jimbofett.bsky.social, on Reddit at jimbofett87, and on the Discord as jimbofett, and that's with 2 T's, on the Legion Fan Club Discord, as well as the CPOV Discord. So if you want to follow this podcast or get access to the Legion Discord, we are at longlivethelegion.bsky.social, or send us an email and tell us what you think at longlivethelegion2025 at gmail.com. And until next time, we're going to sign off the Legion Mission Monitor Board, and long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun. Whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.